So hi everyone and welcome to the sixth, I think, webinar of our IWIL Week Hour of Youth Festival. Today we're kind of working in partnership with Volunteer Scotland and also some amazing young people who have been involved in the YouthVIP work that's been going on to bring you this webinar on the future landscapes of youth volunteering and social action in Scotland. Just a wee bit of housekeeping before we get started. If we can keep ourselves on mute when we're in the main room, that would be absolutely fantastic. It just kind of helps with any background noise or any interference. We are recording the session as well. You probably got a wee notification when you jumped in. So if you feel more comfortable turning your videos off and using the chat function to ask questions, then that's absolutely fine as well. Please feel free to do so. And yeah, we'll kind of kick off. So what we're kind of going to explore within this session, we're here from kind of 2 till 3:30. We're going to look at some of the data that we have at the moment in terms of youth volunteering and social action in Scotland. I'm going to do a little bit about the kind of wider picture policy landscape that's kind of ongoing at the moment. We're also going to explore some of the challenges and opportunities that our organisations can kind of think about going forward in terms of youth volunteering and social action, and we're going to provide a little bit of an overview of where IWIL is going moving forward and introduce the new IWIL Scotland Power of Youth Charter. So a wee bit of background to the IWIL campaign in case anybody's not aware. The IWIL campaign is a UK-wide campaign that was started in 2013 by His Royal Highness Prince Charles and is kind of facilitated at a UK-wide level by the charity Step Up to Serve. And the campaign was started to increase the opportunities for young people to take part in youth social action and volunteering across the UK. You can kind of see on the slide that there's been a number of kind of stepping stone points for IWIL in Scotland. So in 2015, YouthLink Scotland, Young Scot and Education Scotland became the strategic leads. And then in 2016, we established a Scottish IWIL advisory group that's made up of kind of cross-sector leaders from across Scotland to help drive the campaign forward and offer that kind of cross-sector perspective. And last year, we were really fortunate to recruit myself as a full-time development officer, so really adding that resource and capacity to the movement in a Scottish context. I'm sure most people will be aware that the campaign is kind of at the core of the campaign is our incredible IWIL ambassadors across the UK. There's over 200, and in Scotland we've got around 30. And Rachel and Katrina, who are on the call today, are IWIL ambassadors in Scotland as well, and they have been at the heart of developing our new strategic plan for IWIL going forward, which launched yesterday, and kind of at the core of all our kind of decision making as well. So you'll be able to hear a little bit more from them later on. I think I'm going to stop there for now, and I'm going to pass over, we've got some excellent speakers with us today. I'm going to pass over to Debbie from Volunteer Scotland, who's going to take us through a little bit of the current kind of data that we have on youth volunteering and youth social action in Scotland. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and Debbie, over to you.
Thank you. So we're going to be looking at the evidence that we've got for young people in Scotland statistically. So we're going to look at 3 main data sources. We've got the Young People in Scotland survey that was last undertaken in 2019. It's run by Ipsos Murray and is an omnibus survey of secondary school pupils in Scotland. We've got a representative sample of over 1,700 young people in Scotland aged 11 to 18. It covers 60 state secondary schools, and we've got representation from all 26 local authorities. Survey self-completed, and it was completed September to November 2019. We're also going to do some comparisons to adult volunteer participation, and we're going to use that doing the Scottish Household Survey from 2018. The reason that we're using 2018 is that informal volunteering is only asked every 2 years in the Scottish Household Survey. So it'll be asked in the this year's survey 2020, so we don't have that data yet. And the third that we're going to use is an Ipsos Money Omnibus survey that we had some questions in 2020, and that's to investigate the impact of COVID-19 in volunteering in Scotland. It was asked of adults aged 16 plus, and it looked at volunteering before, during, and a commitment to volunteer after COVID-19. The key points I'm going to cover are formal and informal youth volunteer participation. We're going to have a look at youth versus adult participation. We're going to introduce some stats on volunteering frequency and intensity. We're going to look at the key stats on youth volunteering demographics. We're going to have a look at the types of volunteering that young people are undertaking and the benefits they're reporting from their volunteering. And lastly, we're going to look at the propensity of young people to volunteer post-COVID-19. So the first slide that we have shows the formal participation rate for young people. That's at 49%. This compares to 45% in 2016 and 52% in 2018. So a slight drop from 2018 to 2019. For informal volunteer youth participation, the volunteer participation rate is 25%. This is the first year that informal volunteering has been included in the Young People in Scotland survey, so we can't quite do any comparisons on that yet. If we have a wee look at youth versus adult volunteer participation, and we look at formal first, we can see that for 11 to 18-year-olds from the Young People in Scotland survey, 49% are volunteering. And then if we move on to look at the adult ranges, if we look at the 25 to 34-year-olds, only 21, so less than half of the youth volunteering numbers. If we look at informal volunteering participation, we see a slightly different story. So for 11 to 18-year-olds, the informal participation rate is 25%, which is 10% lower than for those that are 25 to 34-year-olds. So we've got more young people formally volunteering than adults, but we've got less young people informally volunteering in Scotland. If we have a look at total formal participation rates, so young people we saw previously is 49% and adults is 26%. But if we then look at the regular volunteer participation, so that's those that are volunteering at least once a month, it is 29% for young people compared to 20% of adults. So more young people are volunteering on a more regular basis formally. And we see the opposite for informal volunteering. So we saw that the young people participation rate informally is 25%. That's compared to 36% of adults. And we see that 16% of young people are volunteering informally at least once a month. And that compares to 30% of adults. If we then look at the number of hours that young people and adults are volunteering, and the way the question is structured is it asks for the total number of hours you've volunteered in the past 4 weeks. So 54% of young people are volunteering less than an hour in the past 4 weeks, and that compares to 19% of adults. So it looks from this data like young people are volunteering with less intensity, they're given less hours. We can convert that to an annual number. So young people are given 14 million hours of help a year, which is pretty incredible. And adults in Scotland are given 128 million hours per year. If we have a look at some of the formal volunteer participation demographics, we see that girls volunteer more than boys. We see that those of a white ethnicity volunteer more than other ethnicities. There's higher volunteer participation in rural areas compared to urban. The least deprived areas have a higher participation rate than the most deprived. And those are all trends that we also see in adult formal volunteer participation rate in Scotland. The one really interesting stat here is the long-term health conditions. So 55% of young people with a long-term health condition are volunteering, compared to 50% of those that don't have any long-term health conditions. This is the opposite to what we see for adults. The participation rates for adults is lower, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a few slides. If we look at informal volunteer and participation demographics, we see kind of the same trends. So we see higher participation rates for white ethnicities, for those living in rural areas, for those in least deprived areas. We see this trend coming through again for long-term health conditions. So for young people with a long-term health condition, their volunteer participation rate is higher than those that don't have a long-term health condition. Again, that's opposite for adults. Then we look at gender. So informal volunteering has a higher participation rate for boys and girls. We don't see this in any of the adult data. If we look at trends going back over time, female participation rates have always been higher than male participation rates. If we look at a couple of the demographics in a little bit more detail, so the first one we're going to look at is deprivation. So it's based on the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation Quintiles. So that ranks areas in Scotland on a scale of 1, the most deprived 20% of the population, to 5, which is the least deprived 20% of the population. If we consider the chart on the right first, which is formal adult volunteering, we've almost got a straight line relationship. So as deprivation decreases as we move up the quintiles, as deprivation decreases as we move up the quintiles, we see formal volunteer participation increase. And that's a well-established trend in Scotland that we've seen for many years. Interestingly, if we look at formal youth volunteering, we're not seeing the same as for adults. So the stat that's of particular interest is quintile 2 at 39%. So those living in quintile 2 who are less deprived areas in quintile 1 have got a lower participation rate. That's something that we haven't seen in previous surveys, we haven't seen in the adult survey, and that's something that we'll have a look at in more detail if that comes through in the next survey as well, because it's quite interesting to see a pattern that's different from the established pattern in adults. If we look at informal volunteering by deprivation and we look at adults first, you can see that there's not the same kind of straight line relationship. It's a bit all over the place almost. Between quintiles 1 and quintile 5, there's a 7% difference. For formal volunteering, the difference is 11%. So it kind of hints towards informal volunteering for adults being a bit more inclusive and perhaps informal volunteering. If we look at the informal youth volunteering, we can see that quintile 1 and quintile 2 are the same at 20%. And then we see a jump to 29% for quintile 3, and it kind of stabilizes at that level at 28% for quintiles 4 and 5. So I think the areas that we'd like to look at in more detail or that are of particular interest is why we're not seeing the adult pattern here. We're seeing why are more young people in quintile 1 and 2 not being, why are they not involved in informal volunteering? So that's an interesting question for us to look at in some more detail, hopefully. So the most important, I think, demographic finding for young people, if we look at formal volunteer participation for those that have physical or mental health condition, for young people it's 55%. It's 5% higher than those that have no long-term physical or mental health condition. And if we look at the chart for adults, the volunteer participation for those with a long-term health condition is 24%. That's 4% lower than those without. So this kind of points to youth volunteering and perhaps being, sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought, more inclusive to those that have long-term physical or mental health conditions. If we look at informal volunteering, we see the same trend in adults. We see that there's only a 1% difference now between those with and without long-term health conditions. So it would suggest that informal adult volunteering is slightly more inclusive. If we look at youth volunteering, we're seeing the same. We're seeing that those that do have a physical or mental health condition have a volunteer participation rate that's 6% higher than those that don't. So again, it's kind of pointing towards inclusivity of informal volunteering for those with long-term physical and mental health conditions in young people. If we have a wee look at what young people are formally volunteering in, it's mainly physical activity, sports and exercise, children or youth groups outside schools, children or young people inside schools, and hobbies and recreation. If we have a look at the benefits from formal volunteering, having fun, increasing confidence, feeling part of a team are the main well-being effects that we're seeing. But we're also seeing career benefits coming forward. So young people are reporting learning new skills from their volunteering and becoming a leaders high up there on the list as well. And the last bit of data we're going to look at is young people volunteering before, during and after COVID-19. For this data, we're looking at 16 to 24-year-olds because Dips's Money data started at 16. But it's really interesting if we look pre-COVID-19, the overall volunteer participation, so that includes formal and informal, was 47%. During COVID-19, that jumped to 73%. And 79% of young people in this age group have an intention to volunteer post-COVID-19, which is an amazingly high figure. If we have a look at the intention to volunteer by volunteer type, so we've got formal volunteering, which is through a group, club or organisation, mutual aid, which is through a group that's set up informally, locally within your community, and informal volunteering, so that's you going out and doing stuff on your own. Then the 16 to 24-year-olds have got a higher intention to volunteer in all three types of volunteering. So that's really, it would be really encouraging if we do see this post-COVID-19, and especially if the 16 to 24-year-olds can be encouraged to keep that volunteering up throughout their lifetimes. So just in summary, we've seen that formal participation for young people in Scotland is 49% compared to 26% of adults. Informal volunteering is 25% compared to 36% of adults. We've got 29% of young people formally volunteering at least monthly compared to 20% of adults. We've got 16% of young people informally volunteering at least monthly compared to 30% of adults. If we look at volunteering intensity, so those volunteering less than an hour in the last 4 weeks, young people sit at 54% compared to 19% of adults. We've got more girls that are volunteering formally, but we've got more boys volunteering informally, which isn't the case for adults. We see more young people with long-term health conditions volunteer both formally and informally, which, as we looked at, is the opposite to the adult situation. The young people are mainly involved in volunteering around sport, children, hobbies and recreation. Wellbeing benefits are cited as or more frequently than career benefits, but we are seeing that they're receiving both from the volunteering they're undertaking. And really encouragingly, for current and future participation, there's an increase in total volunteer participation for 16 to 24-year-olds from 47% to 73%, which was during COVID-19. And this significant increase in participation is projected to be maintained post-COVID-19. It's higher than all other age groups, and that's for formal mutual aid and informal volunteering. And that's me done.
So perfect, thank you, Debbie. The stats are, I think it's really interesting to show just how much young people truly are taking part in volunteering and social action. And I've just realised that my head is like right down the bottom of this camera. So what we're going to do now is link that into the policy landscape and all the different things that are happening government level to sort of show just how, I guess, the impact of youth volunteering in Scotland. So Jenny is going to take the lead on that for us.
Yep, thank you. I'll just make sure my screen is sharing properly here. Okay, cool. Oh, I went right back to the start. There we go. So hi everyone, I realised I didn't introduce myself earlier, which was really rude of me. So my name's Jenny Snell and I am the IWIL National Development Officer for Scotland and work out of YouthLink Scotland. And I'm going to briefly, I'm going to try and keep it really brief, there's lots to try and unpack here, but I'm going to briefly speak about some of the wider kind of frameworks and policy and bigger picture things that are happening in terms of youth volunteering and social action in Scotland. So one of the kind of probably the most important kind of key framework that's came out recently from Scottish Government, which is really kind of crucial and important for us to think of going forward, is the Volunteering for All framework. And you can see on the screen just now the kind of case for change as to why the Scottish Government kind of commissioned this piece of work to widen participation and improve access to opportunities for more people in Scotland to volunteer. And I'm going to just kind of go through it quickly in terms of how it links to the I Will movement, and then also how it links to young people and volunteering more specifically. So you can see the kind of rationale here. So there's lots of different reasons as to why we need to think about making volunteering in Scotland more diverse and more inclusive. So things like at the moment we do have an underrepresentation of disadvantaged groups in formal volunteering roles, and we saw that kind of reflected in the data that Debbie just shared with us. We've also got an ageing population in Scotland, and we can kind of foresee that there's going to be more adults over the age of 65 going forward by 2041, but there'll be fewer working adults. There'll be more people living with long-term conditions, and therefore there's going to be a need for more volunteers, but also fewer probably elder volunteers that would normally take on those roles able to due to living with longer-term conditions. And there's also a heavy reliance on civil corps that you can see there as well, and also a growth in technology, which I think since this framework was launched last year is probably even more relevant now than ever that we're in the current pandemic. And for me, young people are kind of at the core of all of this. So thinking now about how we start to engage young people in volunteering and social action opportunities from a young age is really going to help us overcome some of these issues, and it's really great to see the kind of the youth volunteering embedded throughout the Volunteering for All framework. So this is the framework here, and it would take me ages to go through it all in loads of detail, so we're going to pop a link to it in the chat function as well, so that you can go away and read it and kind of unpick it at your own pace as well. But a few things to kind of pull out, which I think are quite relevant, are that you can see the vision, the purpose, the values down the left-hand side there. That really aligns with the vision and the mission of our new I Will strategic plan that we launched yesterday. So we have based a lot of our new strategic plan on the Volunteering for All framework and how we can build a movement and create a culture in Scotland for youth volunteering and social action that is inclusive and meaningful for all young people to be able to take part, which really aligns with the vision for the overall framework of everyone being able to take part regardless of their personal circumstances or backgrounds. Another few things I wanted to kind of pick out was the outcomes themselves. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this, it's the diagram is a little bit blurry, but the turquoise circle in the middle there, that is the Volunteering for All framework outcomes. And The one on the right-hand side, so here I'll read it out, is volunteering and participation is valued, supported and enabled from the earliest possible age and throughout life. So there's a real focus on thinking about that long-term volunteering and how we engage young people from a kind of an early age. That's something that we've done some research with through iWill, and we've found that actually the younger a young person involved in volunteering, the more likely it is that that's going to become a habit of a lifetime. And that's something that I think we really need to think about going forward, is how do we ensure that young people are having positive volunteering and social action experiences at a young age, so that they want to continue that into their kind of adult life as well. And then linking into that, the outcome on the left-hand side here is about how the volunteering opportunities are diverse, how the quality of them inclusive, and how everyone can kind of get involved and stay involved. So that kind of builds on the last one about that long-term volunteering for young people. So there's two bits that I kind of wanted to unpick there. So the diverse and inclusive part. We saw from Debbie's kind of stats earlier that there is underrepresentation still. There is a gap there between young people from different SIMD levels and also young people from different ethnic minority backgrounds. And one of the priorities for iWill going forward is around creating more opportunities and increasing the number of young people taking part in social action and volunteering from low-income backgrounds and ethnic minority backgrounds. So we've really aligned with that one as well, and it's definitely something to start thinking about in terms of the future. The other bit that I really wanted to highlight there is about the quality of the volunteering opportunities. And that's something that you'll see embedded throughout our new iWill strategic plan as well. So it's not just about increasing the numbers of young people volunteering. It's not a tick box exercise or kind of numbers on paper, but it's about creating those really high quality, meaningful volunteering and youth social action opportunities, so that young people have a positive experience, so that they want to kind of continue volunteering going forward, so that they encourage other people that they know to volunteer, and when they have families, if they have families, they encourage their families, and we build that culture across Scotland that the volunteering is a positive thing. And for me, the kind of key to this is ensuring that young people's voices are included at the very, very start of that kind of decision making and development around volunteering and social action opportunities. So having young people involved in shaping those opportunities is going to ensure that they are more representative, they are more diverse, and that they are more meaningful for young people. So that's just something as well to kind of bear in mind. I'm not going to go into any more of the outcomes and details. Again, I don't want to take up too much time on this, but the principles of the framework are really interesting as well, and they're a really good framework for measuring your own volunteering opportunities. So you can just see the headings in the orange circle there, but actually if you kind of have a further look at them in the document, there's sub-bullet points underneath each of those that are really accessible. They're in really accessible language, and they would be really useful to use with young people as well, so that you can kind of measure and articulate the kind of inclusivity, the diversity, the flexibility of the volunteering opportunities that you're providing. The other thing I wanted to, on the Youth Volunteering for All framework, one final thing on that was that there is currently a delivery plan in development. So the Scottish Government are currently working with partners to build a delivery plan to help make that framework a reality. So there's still work ongoing on that framework, and it's definitely worth kind of keeping an eye on that and seeing how it develops going forward. On the Youth Guarantee, this is another thing that's came out recently in response to COVID-19. So I'm sure that no one is unaware that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and that young people have been a group that's been hit hardest by some of the kind of impacts of COVID-19, especially in terms of employability and future employment kind of prospects. So it's really great to see the Youth Guarantee initiative being launched by Scottish Government and ensuring that no one is left behind, and that we are thinking about solutions on how we can overcome that impact to young people. But in terms of volunteering, it's really relevant, especially for formal volunteering opportunities. So formal volunteering opportunities have been formally recognised within the kind of plan for this as a key role in supporting young people on their pathway to employment, which is a really great positive to see. It's not a separate thing in a corner, a nice to do, but actually that volunteering formally is a kind of embedded part of a young person's employment journey. So that's something that is still in development as well, and we'll watch this space over the kind of next few months to see what happens in terms of volunteering and employment going forward. There's a whole heap of other things that I could kind of go into detail on. We've got the incorporation of the UNCRC into Scots law that's kind of ongoing just now, and that's going to have really interesting impacts in terms of social action and volunteering and young people having a voice. And also the Scottish National Youth Work Strategy for Scotland is ongoing as well. So we recently had further commitment from Scottish Government that is ongoing despite delays with the pandemic. And when the consultation period for that happened, like way back last year, volunteering and youth social action was a priority that young people highlighted to be included in that going forward. So that's just another couple of pieces that are kind of useful to think about in terms of the future landscape. And finally, I'm going to pass on Jane, who's going to share a video about Lockdown Lowdown. So Lockdown Lowdown is a national survey that was developed in partnership with Scottish Youth Parliament, Young Scot and YouthLink Scotland to explore some of the impacts of COVID-19 and the concerns and worries of COVID-19 on young people in Scotland. So this video is from the phase 1 results. Phase 2 was, the survey closed last week, 2 weeks ago now, and the report is due out at the end of November. So there was over 6,000 responses to that survey from young people in Scotland. So a really incredible number of young people took part in that. So definitely kind of keep an eye out on the YouthLink Scotland, Young Scot and Scottish Youth Parliament channels for the report that will come out later this month, because there's going to be some really interesting findings from that. But for now, this video just kind of helps frame some of the concerns that young people have in terms of the future, and might help you kind of think about what the relevance is to volunteering and social action, especially around mental health and well-being and employability. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Jane, if you could put the video on, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Lockdown Lowdown is a survey of young people across Scotland on their concerns about COVID-19. It was produced during lockdown by the Scottish Youth Parliament, YouthLink Scotland and Young Scot.
It tells people what we are experiencing in this really strange and difficult time for us. Nearly 2,500 of us responded to the survey, myself included, and its findings identify what should be prioritised by decision makers to protect our futures.
In terms of education, 42% of us are moderately to extremely concerned about school, college and university closures. Almost half are stressed about exams and coursework, and nearly 2/3 are worried about the impact of coronavirus on their futures.
With the worries about education, jobs and money, it's no surprise that around 40% of our respondents said that they were concerned about their mental well-being. On top of that, around a quarter of respondents said that they were concerned about their physical health being impacted too.
We are even more worried about making sure that our family and friends are safe and well. Almost half of us are worried about the mental health of others, and 2/5 are concerned about the physical health of others.
Almost 1/3 are moderately or somewhat concerned about their ability to look out for or care for others too.
The majority of young people said it's up to politicians to provide information which is clear, honest and reliable.
We don't feel confident in finding information on financial support or mental health services that may be available to us. We'd also like to know more about the impact of our education and how will we be returning to normal.
We have a right to be listened to on all issues that affect our lives. More than 50% of us are worried about how COVID will affect our rights. Policymakers must take the Lockdown Lowdown findings into consideration when making decisions about COVID and what comes next. Listen to what we have to say, and let's work together for the benefit of all of Scotland's young people.
So thanks for that, Jenny. I think the insight of the policy outlook is so important, and I do hope that you take what you saw within Lockdown Lowdown into consideration, especially when, as young people, and that's the first time I saw myself in that video, so that was a little bit of a moment, but we're saying we are so much more concerned around other people than we are ourselves, which I think does give a lot of information in itself. You're now going to hear from myself as an I Will ambassador and a member of YouthVIP, and my colleague Katrina, and we're going to chat a little bit about YouthVIP, what it was, what it still is, and basically a report that we created. So Katrina's going to start us off.
Yeah, hi everyone. So alongside Rachel, I'm one of the Scottish I Will ambassadors, and both of us were part of the YouthVIP group, which, let me get this right, stands for the Youth Volunteering Innovation Project. There we go, we love acronyms in this sector. So yeah, the YouthVIP group was set up, was tasked by Scottish Government to come up with a series of recommendations about youth volunteering and the volunteering sector in Scotland more broadly. So it was a group of 25 young people who were from all over the country. We had representation from the Highlands, the Islands, right down to the borders, through to the Central Belt. So we really had kind of all of Scotland's young people kind of represented somehow in this group. So we can you can see there on the screen the kind of journey that we went through to sort of come up with our recommendations. So we started with our kind of kickoff event, got this group together, and then had a kind of period of really trying to understand and explore what the issues facing young people were. So we conducted a survey of young people in Scotland. We kind of conducted focus groups with different young people. We spoke to sector leaders, we spoke to government to try and figure out what it was that needed to change in the landscape and what it was that were the barriers which were facing young people. So that then led us to create our report, which you can see a photo of here, which I think there's going to be a link to in the chat if you want to read it in more depth, which had 13 recommendations about what Scotland can do to improve volunteering, but specifically youth volunteering. That was launched in March 2019, which feels like it was just yesterday, but obviously quite a bit has happened since then. So I'm just going to pass over to Rachel, and she'll tell you a wee bit about what's happened in that kind of period from us launching that report to where we are now today.
Yeah, March last year definitely doesn't feel as long ago as it is. But so it started off as an event called National Discussion Day, where the group got together in Edinburgh. We launched the report with the support of Eileen Campbell MSP, who then on the day made a commitment that something would happen with our report, and we held her to it, I guess is the best way to describe it. And in June of 2019, in Volunteers Week, myself and Kelly, who was our member from Harris, we went to Edinburgh, because you just send a Highlander and an Islander to the Central Belt for the day, and we presented this report and the 13 recommendations to the cross-party group on volunteering, where a commitment was made again and recorded that something would happen, that we would take this report forward and it would not be allowed to settle and sit in dust. And originally there was meant to be a review 1 year later, which would have put us into June 2020. And you can understand we've been a little bit more lenient on this timescale due to everything that's happened. And now we're at the point where, as Jenny said, the government have reaffirmed that commitment and the belief of our report, and where they have formally adopted all 13 recommendations. A couple required a little bit more looking at, but in principle we received the fantastic news that they were happy with everything officially. And now that working groups and steering groups have started to appear, and we've been quite lucky, and I know personally I received word from one of our partner organisations that I've been asked to sit on one of them, which means those of us that spent 9 hard months writing this are being able to see it through, which I think in the youth work world and in the world of report writing, worlds that don't often mix, it has been so nice to know that all of our hard work and all of our work with our partner organisations, many of you who are on the call today, we couldn't have got to this point without you. So we're going to run through some of the themes of the report, and we're going to chat through a little bit about what they mean. Oh yeah, I agreed to the first three. So the first one is the youth volunteer experience. So we were talking about things like we want to see training for the volunteer organisations on youth inclusion. what that means in essence is that we want to know that when a young person does decide to volunteer with an organisation, they know that it's a young person they're working with. They understand the likes of, I'm a student, I cannot volunteer on a Wednesday afternoon because I'm in school. Bottom line. We want to see the review of a quality assurance mark for voluntary organisations, because we'd heard and we'd seen through our surveys with partner organisations and with, young people, and sometimes you'd see, let's take Volunteer Friendly Award as an example, and sometimes is the follow through happening? Once you've got it, are you still being challenged to uphold it? Which also comes in really useful with the introduction of our Power of Youth Charter that we'll chat about later. Developing youth-friendly specific guidelines. Sometimes the volunteer handbook doesn't recognise that it's young people or the needs of young people. And we'd like to see local area network meetings. And I'm actually quite lucky because I started one yesterday for my job, so I was quite impressed that on a local level they're happening, but we want to see more of these like volunteer manager type meetings happening more regularly. So the second theme is the personal and professional development through volunteering. So the local area volunteer advisory scheme, also we do allow them to be called LAVAs, if that is easier to remember. So basically a scheme which is helping to linking into things like youth volunteering champion schools. So we know that schools offer a lot of volunteering opportunities, and for 95% of young people, that's where they'll be. So some more link that, volunteering they do at drama club or choir is just as relevant as uniformed organisations. We'd like to see a national forum for businesses in the third sector, because we were amazed throughout our reporting how closely businesses and the third sector work together. But we never really know. We don't actually see what's coming out of that, and they're two amazing sectors. We would like to see a pilot scheme to support small and medium enterprises to enable staff days to take volunteering. We know that volunteering is awesome for team building. We want to encourage more organisations and more companies to take that. And we want to create a framework to support young people not in education, employment or training, also known as MEET, some of you might know it that way, to gain work-based skills and personal development through volunteering, because as much as I said about schools, we know academia isn't for every young person, and I'm really lucky to say that recommendation is one that I'm helping to take forward via a steering group, so any information or advice I would love to see. And the stigma around volunteering. Again, as I said, we want to see something like the Youth Volunteering Champion schools. We don't want, unfortunately we heard within education, it was, oh, volunteer or I take you off my school roll. Volunteering should never be used as leverage like that. So we want to be able to highlight the amazing things that are happening. And again, the local area volunteering advisory scheme, in a nutshell, we want to see more promotion of things like your TSIs. We want to be able to see third sector interfaces really being at the heart of volunteering within your local authority and being that awesome bubble that we know it is. And road shows to promote volunteering in local communities. Just now, it might be virtual. Post-COVID, we always dreamed of getting a trailer, whacking some volunteer organisations on there, and just carting these around Scotland. If anybody's up for that post-COVID, let us know.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just kind of chat through the next few themes. So this one was about kind of getting into volunteering. I think what we all realised quite early on is, for us, what was really important in our volunteer journey was that first step. Like, how do you start? It's the question that we get asked kind of all the time. So again, it's kind of a lot of the recommendations kind of fall under this theme, because this obviously kind of encompasses a lot of what Rachel mentioned. But the kind of aim here was, one thing which came out as really important was that kind of peer level support for getting into volunteering. A lot of us, I know personally for me, it was people recommending stuff to me who were my age and my kind of peers. So that's kind of the idea of youth volunteering champion schools, kind of to draw on that. But then also kind of try and reach young people who aren't in that school environment and show them that there is ways to get into volunteering. So that kind of the kind of themes fit the themes that kind of, what am I trying to say? The recommendations that fit under this theme are kind of all to do with that kind of initial jump start, kind of getting into volunteering. Then the fifth theme is kind of the accessibility of volunteering. So this, we had kind of something on volunteer experience already, which Rachel covered, but we thought there needed to be kind of a specific nod to the fact that volunteering needs to be accessible, and we kind of encountered various barriers. So a lot of the kind of recommendations that fall under this theme are the same as the ones that fall under that first theme. But the new one to note here is the Access Fund for voluntary organisations. So we kind of found through our kind of research and work that although kind of making inclusive environments, making the environments accessible was really important, actually sometimes it just came down to organisations not having the funds is that for particularly smaller ones, to try and ensure that they can reach and target young people.
Rachel, I think Katrina might have frozen.
Oh no, right. So this one was the sector approach to volunteering. So as we say, we'd like to see partnership working, and we would like to see a lot more kind of awesomeness within different sectors. So again, that's things like the local area network meetings, bringing the third sector together. We would love to see a legacy group of young people to oversee the implementation of these recommendations. Young people wrote this report. Young people have seen it through right up until I'm talking to you now, and I will hopefully continue to watch young people take it forward in the future, whether that is the original group or a new group, because to show the power of youth and the power of young people, they have got to be at the heart. And again, annual volunteering summit, get your volunteers together, get your sector together. You know, this year it's probably going to be like this, but we never know. And as I said before, you know, this national forum for the businesses in the third sector, you know, we see so much in terms of the, you know, businesses maybe sending volunteers or for a day, or, you know, linking in for things like charitable events, and we just want to be able to pull it all together. So that's that one.
Okay, I think I'm back now. Is everyone able to hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Great. You know, internet always picks the best times to kick you out of a Zoom call when you're the one trying to present in it. So yeah, just shout if it goes off again, and luckily I have my wonderful co-star to step in. So now kind of we've given you a bit of a flavour of what YouthVIP was about and what our kind of recommendations were for the future, as well as what you've heard about the kind of statistical shape of the volunteering sector among young people, as well as the kind of policy landscapes. We're going to go into some breakout rooms and just have a bit of a chat about these three questions, kind of, you know, what's the impact of COVID-19 be, kind of thinking about those things that we've explored today, like what are the opportunities and challenges ahead, and then thirdly, the role of kind of I Will in Scotland. You know, what is the best support that you kind of need from us to kind of support you to grow the power of youth. So I think someone who's got more technical expertise than me is going to be able to pop us all into breakout rooms. I think we're all back, but I will just get started. We're just going to kind of go round each of the groups and just to hear a wee bit about what they said. So I was facilitating one of the groups, so I'll just kind of kick us off. So I think kind of three key things came out. One in the kind of response to, we had a bit of a chat about kind of going digital and the response to COVID, and there was a kind of a recognition it was quite difficult, and a lot of programs, you know, everyone had things launched for March, which were then not really able to run in person, but actually there's been quite a bit of creativity and innovation from the sector, which is really, really exciting. Then we were kind of talking about more broadly the kind of opportunities and challenges, and what came out quite strongly here was actually just the kind of capacity and funding to deal with demand for volunteering. I think we kind of were all in agreement that actually young people really, really want to volunteer, but because of the kind of processes or kind of lack of funding or lack of kind of importance attached to volunteering in some places, it can be really difficult to manage that demand. So actually that was more a concern than any initial problems of people wanting to. And then we just had a wee bit of a chat and we probably could have gone on for another half an hour. I'm sure the rest of the groups were very similar. About kind of informal volunteering, and actually there's something potentially for I Will Scotland to do there to promote what informal volunteering is and what different volunteering opportunities look like, because you know it was touched on in that survey that it was the rates of informal volunteering were lower, but we were kind of saying actually we think a lot of young people probably are informally volunteering, so potentially there's something there about raising the profile of that. So that was kind of the headlines from our group. I'll throw it over to Rachel, who I think was speaking in one of the groups, if she wants to feedback, or someone else from that group.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, so in terms of how COVID had impacted different organisations, different groups, in some cases it just halted everything. Like you can't go into a school if you're doing school-based work because, you know, the school gates are locked. Trying to adjust to a digital platform takes time, and you know, there was suddenly this, I guess, this demand of obviously, I think, like I know personally, just because things had gone online, you've got connectivity issues. You know, I didn't have a laptop for the first 2 months of lockdown, so nobody could get hold of me. In terms of the opportunities and the challenges, you know, there was a lovely line that was said where even after the pandemic, I'm going to keep using Zoom. I'm going to keep a digital platform, especially if you're doing something that's, you know, Scottish and national. You know, I live in the Highlands, so actually even regionally being able to Zoom call my colleagues elsewhere or do, you know, like this is so handy. And one of the biggest challenges, we just don't know what's going to happen, and there's certain things, you know, where one of the challenges is how long are we going to have, for example, resistance from schools to let external agencies actually come in person, especially when we've got this tiered system where you might be working across multiple tiers and you might have to do that face-to-face work, but you can't, you know, you don't actually know what the rules are for your kind of job. And in terms of where we can best, the I Will campaign can best support, grow the power of youth, the Wood Foundation have always been lovely friends of ours, so I was very happy when we got told, just continue to get the power of youth out there, continue to showcase all the different things that are going on, how they can be done, and the importance of having that youth approach and that youth-friendly approach to things. A potential thing was maybe as I Will ambassador, so Katrina, get your thinking hat on because you love to write things, something in reference to the Youth Work in Education Recovery Fund, where the funding's just been announced. We've seen loads of partner organisations kind of say how amazing it is and how awesome it is. So we're potentially going to look at a youth voice approach in that, and some sort of potential framework around encouraging the youth voice, but within this digital setting, particularly if you're dealing with a class of 30 young people, it can be quite interesting and difficult at times to help get messages across. So that's something from ours.
Fab. I think I'll go over to Matthew next, I think was facilitating one of the groups. So just your kind of top 3 points that came out in response to those 3 questions.
Okay, yeah, so thanks. So basically in terms of the, like everyone else, the major issue is the constraints on volunteering in the current COVID world, the importance of IT and virtual communications to overcome that. Notwithstanding that, there were some really interesting examples of training courses being delivered and support, in other words, varying the existing core services and evolving them into supporting them in different ways, like being a good supporter, living life to the full, etc., creative sessions and stuff is addressing mental health. So some really kind of interesting positives there as to how responding against that. And in terms of what the opportunities are going forward, I think it's basically the things that have worked well is in fact is the upside of virtual communications. So the idea that we can actually particularly for those that are based in rural areas, the opportunity to use Zoom and other communication medium is actually making a more engaged approach to liaising, for example, with volunteers or people that were volunteering with them and with colleagues and other partners. I think that's a positive. So that's sort of virtual, so the greater reach from that. In terms of challenges, one of the things is that a lot of the demographics that young people are working with and volunteering with are older, and I think the issues of use of technology and also linked to deprivation and low incomes of not actually having the equipment in the first place is really a big issue. And in parallel with that is libraries being closed and the pressures that's facing on how we actually do communicate. In terms of what we're going forward, in terms of I Will and what it can do, there's only two main things picked up. One links into the VIP recommendations, which is this information pack. And I think reading between this is actually probably a bit more than that. It's actually training as well, but they've actually got really good practice notes that are available, well written and constructed and concise, that can share good practice in terms of how to be, for all volunteer involving organizations, to be youth focused and understand youth and represent that in all aspects of their volunteering engagement. And the last and interesting aspect was schools and the idea of having themed areas of volunteering to particular the interests of the pupils. So for pupils that are interested in history and other themed areas and might have a career interest, that we might try and veer the volunteering opportunities to Historic Environment Scotland or archaeology bodies or others and things like that, or similarly if it was sport. So a lot of opportunities in sport, but there's all these other interests that young people might have. So that really covers the kind of feedback from our group. Thank you.
Amazing, thanks. I think we've got a couple more left. So Debbie, I think, was chairing one of the groups. So yeah, your kind of three headline kind of things that came out in response to those questions.
So I think in terms of how COVID's impacted, it's the same kind of thing that other groups have discussed around digital engagement. And we talked a little bit about how more young people might be able to get involved in projects digitally. So kind of no travel costs. It's more accessible to people who perhaps couldn't access certain buildings because of health conditions before to be online. When we looked at the opportunities and challenges, digital exclusion, you know, it's almost like there's an expectation that everyone has internet and everyone has devices they can use, which isn't always the case. And there's kind of questions around everyone talking about back to normal, and perhaps a worry that we'll rely solely on online going forward, which isn't necessarily what all young people need. Some work better face to face, so it's about being flexible in your approach and perhaps having a mix of both. And going forward for I Will, we got feedback that's been really good for sharing of information and networking. And it might be nice to have the ambassadors talk to young people, because people feel that young people really like and really relate to hearing other young people's stories. So having that connection between the ambassadors and young people would help.
Thanks, that was some really interesting points there. Finally, over to Jenny, who's just going to give the highlights from her group.
Yeah, I think our discussions followed pretty much everything. I don't know if I have much to add that's not been mentioned already. So we also spoke about the challenges of going digital and how volunteers' kind of engagement had to drop for various different reasons for the pandemic. We spoke about the kind of digital inequality as well and how we have to kind of consider that going forward when balancing it with some of the positives that have came from COVID. So having a balanced approach to kind of online and digital volunteering with still in person and how we can manage that going forward. There were some really great examples in our group as well of ways that we've adapted to COVID and some really innovative and creative kind of solutions, and how actually we need to ensure that those kind of innovative doors essentially that we're open stay open going forward, and that we continue to kind of embed those in practice rather than kind of go back to the way things were. So finding that kind of balance of that. Yeah, I think everybody else has mentioned everything that we said. We also had, in terms of I Will going forward, we had young people being kind of the I Will Ambassador speaking to other young people and going in and kind of helping to think about some youth strategies and volunteer strategies and things like that. And we had the kind of networks and communication channels as well, and how I Will can be a kind of a networking and communication between different organisations. So yeah, pretty much the same as what everybody else was saying. So yeah, thanks, Katrina.
Thanks. Yeah, I think some really, really interesting things there, really strong themes around kind of, you know, digital and how we incorporate that. But also, I think what it's highlighted for me is like there's never time more needed for the I Will campaign. So really, really excited to hand back over to Rachel, who's going to tell you a wee bit more about, you know, what we're doing next steps with I Will and how that can hopefully kind of answer some of the kind of things which were raised here today. So Rachel, back over to you.
Perfect. So moving forward, as Jenny touched on as well, and it's been touched on throughout, we do have a strategic plan, we have a charter, we have so many things. But as part of our charter, we are going to use the power principles. Now, for record, this was originally created by our UK-wide friends, and we liked it, we adopted it, we made it blue, we stuck our branding on it, it's ours now. So we are going to prioritise empowering young people to volunteer and take social action. So basically, we're going to have a social action plan to empower young people. We are going to encourage the opening up of decision making within structures. You know, we want the youth voice to be in it. We're going to have the working in partnership. So as we've touched on, that collaborative approach, that sort of, you know, cross-sector approach. We want to evidence the benefits of youth social action. We know that so much goes on out there, and Debbie's statistics and presentation showed us that, but we want to show more. We want, I guess, as was said, you know, those actual case studies, whether it be, you know, us as I Will ambassadors going and chatting to young people, or organisationally, you guys really picking it up. And we want to recognise and celebrate the impact of young people. And I will just say that I found out before England created it, they actually stole it from Scotland, so it was ours originally in the first place. So this is the charter in a nutshell. So that was the charter in a nutshell. But so what we'd like you and your organisations to do is, if you haven't already, go sign it. So basically, we're asking that a senior leader, so your chief exec, if you're a charity or an organisation with a board, brownie points if you can get the chair of your board to agree to sign it. Basically, you create industry or organisation specific actions that you want to deliver on the charter commitments. You would hopefully then put a nice wee snazzy social media post out to help show us that you've done it, but also show that you're a leading organisation within your sector. You know, I think we're still at the kind of, it's not been long launched, so you are still within that kind of founding signatories stage. So make yourselves look really awesome that you got in there just as we've launched it. Your organisation will hold itself accountable to young people and track its development by sharing annually what you've got up to. And you'll be sharing that with us as I Will ambassadors, with your networks, with your fellow organisations. But it's also a really great chance to make sure that you have those conversations with young people. And the impacts are huge. As I say, you're going to gain access to the networks that within the I Will partnership. You're going to get new ideas. You're going to strengthen your reputation, strengthen your commitments. You're going to show other people what you can do and set an example for your sector. So that's it. That is all we've got time for, and we're coming in a couple of minutes early, so that is impressive. So thank you for joining us today, and we really, really hope that you've learned a lot, and we look forward to seeing your charter commitments. I'm going to be scrolling social media like mad later on. So what you're going to go on to do is going to help us build on the youth volunteering and social action movement in Scotland. You're going to show us that young people are recognised, that they're valued. So check out the I Will in Scotland Twitter and Instagram. Use the hashtag IWillWeek and Power of Youth if you want to chat about this session or anything else that your organisation is up to this week. Thank you, and we hope you have a brilliant I Will Week 2020.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and everyone else, and a big thank you to Rachel, Katrina, Matthew and Debbie for all their inputs and facilitation as well today. We really appreciate it, and yeah, please keep in touch for the rest of the week and have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.